trying to milk a little clock here, but they're in Callahan country right now. Giannis is going to have to let this go. He finds DeMarie on the far sideline. Burnett gives him a couple of yards, and oh, that one goes down! A near Callahan for Hansen.
Unbelievable stretch from Noah Hansen. Oh my goodness.
There's 2 minutes on the clock, and Minnesota is on the doorstep with a chance to go up.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner in return from a brief hiatus. That is Evan Lepler. And Evan, I'm not going to mince any words here. That was the best divisional championship weekend this league has ever seen. I know we've had some great divisional finals in the past, but just front to back. I mean, other than the Boston blowout, that was a stupendous set of games this past Friday and Saturday night. And now we have the 2025 UFA Championship weekend set. Atlanta, Boston, Minnesota, and Salt Lake will be heading to Madison, Wisconsin, August 22nd and 23rd to decide the 2025 UFA crown. I'm just going to set the table really quick because I know we've got so much to talk about with how these games sussed out. Should we just go through chronologically? I feel like that's the best way to tackle this because there's just so many different storylines here.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, wow.
Yeah.
Last year's championship or division championship weekend was pretty darn memorable too,
It
with
was.
two road teams winning by one on successive nights. So I don't want to go so far as to say this was the best divisional championship game ever, but
All right.
obviously the Chicago-Minnesota game and the Salt Lake-Oakland game, for different reasons, were chaotic and insane in a way that we throw those words around a lot, talking about Frisbee and like, man, that was insane. This is chaos. But those two games, kind of like the Austin-Atlanta game 2 years ago, like you go back and watch that game, the number of twists and turns and flops of the disc that were just inexplicable and staggering.
Highlight plays,
Yeah.
you know, the Matt Smith greatest and everything else. I felt the same way with this year too.
Yeah. So the Chicago-Minnesota game had, oddities and highlight plays and emotion and drama in the preseason narrative of the Chicago guys coming back for the sole reason of beating Minnesota and now having to sit with those words for a whole offseason. And then, Salt Lake to get off to the start they did, and then to just have such a miserable third quarter, and then to fight back. I mean, if not for Noah Hansen, we would be talking nonstop about Tony Mounga. I feel like, Mounga's the sub-headline, though, because that Hansen block, in my mind, I mean, bop, talking Hansen all day long. That play was unbelievable. The timing of it, the athleticism, every time I watch it, and I've probably watched it 50 times now, it just makes me say wow in a new way. Because I do think Don DeMarie had a little lane there, and Noah closed it out, and that's an all-time block. I didn't write about this in the Tuesday toss, but I did talk with Matt Rader briefly about the Donnie Clark play and the Noah Hansen play, and he was on both of those teams in Seattle in 2016 and obviously Minnesota now, and he's like, yeah, I felt some similarity between those two games and those two moments, and yeah, what a weekend. Let's go through it chronologically, because I
just wanted to put one more point on what you were saying too. It wasn't just Hansen and Mounga. It was a weekend of defensive standouts. I mean, you talk about Justin Burnett and the impact he's had in Minnesota's two playoff games. How about Tyler Randall and Lucas McClamrock for Atlanta, huh?
Yeah.
I think of them almost as middle linebackers or something. When both of them are active and fully healthy, they just take that hustle defensive unit to another level. Boston holding DC to 9 goals in a full regulation game. I mean,
if
defense is the new meta.
Sorry, if McClamrock and Randall are middle linebackers, what defensive position is Michael Fairley? Is he a nose tackle?
Yeah, absolutely, man. He's like Aaron Donald or something. You just got to put two bodies on him to really get any sort of efficacy on him. I mean, how about that hand block on Travis Dunn? When do we see hand blocks on Travis Dunn? I loved your part in the Tuesday toss, getting Fairley to talk about how much film he studies. You know, I'm a big film guy, so hearing players talk about, putting in that extra effort off the field to really understand their matchups. I think that's some of the most exciting stuff that this league has to offer. That one game sort of focus on, this is the guy I need to eliminate, and Fairley showing up once again. I mean, that dude's just a dog. So yeah, let's launch into that South Division final. Atlanta perseveres 22-18, but man, San Diego, as they did in their first two games against the Hustle, they made it punchy. They kept in it through the second half, and it wasn't until that stalled out red zone possession at the beginning of the fourth quarter for San Diego, where Atlanta kind of took the lead. And again, it was on that Lucas McClamrock kind of over the shoulder, almost blindside block on a reset pass. Reminded me a lot of like a Cody Spicer play. Just the intuitiveness, the field IQ to know what throw is coming in that situation as you're facing 180 degrees away from the thrower, But yeah, Atlanta, I mean, 3 consecutive losses in game-to-go games in the playoffs. Talking about 2021 at the buzzer against New York. Talking about 2023, as we mentioned at the beginning of this pod, against Austin. And then 2024, last year, against their rivals from Carolina. Hustle, finally getting the monkey off their back. I thought you had some terrific points in the Tuesday toss, the Tuba quote about bringing their demons on the field. What was it like in the stadium that night? What was the feeling after that Atlanta win?
Honestly, the word that comes to mind is relief. Second is joy and like just the cathartic feeling of finally it happened. I mean, I've said all season long there's been a hunger and focus with this Atlanta team. I did think that it was interesting and notable that I think after the McClamrock block, there may have been a timeout. And there was one situation when San Diego had a chance to tie, didn't do it. And then it was like Cam Brock to Sean Cannell for the goal. And I thought it was interesting that, it was 2 guys without any Atlanta baggage in that moment finishing the play. Because
also a historical reversal of the roles we traditionally associate with them. It was Cameron Brock with the assist to Sean Cannell.
Yeah. And it like, it was a short throw. It was a simple throw for Cam.
Sure.
But just, I was going to say there's still baggage with this Atlanta team. There were still moments during this game that made you raise your eyebrows, and you saw some of those demons out there with them. Some weird plays from Hulsmeyer. Hayden Austin-Knabb did not have a great night, but thankfully for Atlanta, Austin Taylor and Adam Miller were rocks. And, Alec Wilson-Holiday, Sean Cannell, Cameron Brock, the 3 noteworthy, offseason additions were really solid and steady. And the defense had enough big plays. And, San Diego also did them a bunch of favors. I mean, a night that Daniel Brunker's trying to forget with a bunch of drops. There were just some nervy, strange moments from San Diego where they kind of took themselves out of the game late. They had real chances. I mean, they had the disc on the doorstep. I thought Casey Wu had caught it to tie. He was ruled on the line. That turned out to be a correct call. Looking at the replay, watching it live, I kind of thought he was in, so I was mistaken live. But, it's funny, Adam. In the aftermath of the weekend, despite how historic it was for Atlanta, I feel like it was kind of the most forgettable game. And I know you might say that, well, Boston, D.C. was, but Boston, just the way that they dominated D.C. was so stunning to me. And they made the Breeze look like such an inferior Frisbee team. That was almost more groundbreaking then all right, Atlanta won this game finally by 4 that they were supposed to win, that they should win. They did win. And now we see if they can, conquer everybody else at championship weekend. I'm excited to see that group and happy for them at championship weekend. But yeah, I mean, part of it was Friday, almost a week ago now. But yeah, in many ways, like that game kind of went according to the script, which none of the other 3 games really did for various reasons. So yeah, it was a great night though for Atlanta. I appreciate Tuba, being honest and talking about his emotions and feelings. And I mean, I joke with him, like, we've had so many long conversations and exchanged so many long emails through the years. At some point down the road, I'm going to have to release like Tuba Time, the unauthorized biography of Tuba Benson Jaja and his thoughts and feelings of Ultimate Frisbee. Because he is a really thoughtful art. You say please now. You've edited some of my stuff and you've seen some of his quotes. I don't know if you're going to sign up to edit this thing because it will be a lengthy tome, if you understand what I'm saying. But yeah, just a guy who's really passionate. For those who aren't aware, like Tuba coached the Cannons, Jacksonville Cannons, before they moved to Tampa Bay a decade ago. And so it's not just the Atlanta losses that have been sitting with Tuba. The 2015 South Division final between the Cannons and the Flyers might be the craziest South Division final ever. A game that it felt like the Cannons had won, and it was, stolen from them by both the Flyers, and I know Tuba would argue the officials. And then 2 years after that, they beat Dallas in the regular season, but then stumbled against them in the playoffs. And I think Bobby Lay, if I remember correctly, like, there was either a death in the family or something happened that, made Bobby not be his best in the final. I believe he still played. Vague memories.
He, I think, showed up at halftime, if I remember. He was late to the game or something for a flight. But yeah, they were missing a couple other starters in that 2017 game.
So, like, you add those 2 heartbreaking Cannons moments into all of Tuba's baggage. Just to see him get there, I'm excited to see him coach at championship weekend, and they get a rematch against Minnesota, team they had never played before this year, and now they get them again in the semifinals under the lights at Breeze Stevens Field. I'm so excited for what the atmosphere is going to be like at Breeze. By the way, it's always electric. But it just feels like with the matchups we've got and the fan bases we've got and the circumstances, and, you could argue about who's the favorite, and I'm sure we will, but it feels like 4 pretty equal teams, and any of the 4 could walk away as the champion. We got a lot of fun stuff ahead.
I wanted to go back and put an extra point because you got just this terrific quote from Tuba about that baggage. And he said, and I quote, "The message pregame is that we may not be able to get rid of nerves, but that we were built and prepared to play with them. I told them it was never about killing our demons, but simply to bring them with us in this game and take them for a ride." Again, to your point about releasing like a coffee table book of Tuba's quotes, that one is one that should go up above the locker room that you tap on the way out, like for Notre Dame. And you talk about those Cannons teams. You know who else is on those Cannons teams? Michael Fairley. And I'll tell you, he brought his demons into this game and he took them for the ride. And it might have been some Growlers who got dragged along on that ride too.
Yep, Brad St. Johns as well.
Jeremy Langdon, who
Florida guy Langdon.
He was the MVP finalist in that 2017 game. You talk about that first ever win at Dallas. Jeremy Langdon had one of the best individual games this league has ever seen. He, I think, scored almost 15 times, caught the game-winning goal in traffic, laying out past, I think it was Dylan Freechild or somebody, to catch the goal. This team has been building to this moment and assembling pieces kind of from all over that southeastern region. And finally, they punched their ticket to the Final Four. You mentioned some of these matchups with the win for Atlanta. They will be facing off against the reigning champions in the second final against Minnesota on August 22nd, that Friday night semifinal fiesta that's going to be happening in a week from Tomorrow, we're recording this on Thursday, August 14th. Try to get it up tonight. But yeah, I mean, I'm just so excited for these matchups. But before we kind of get into more of a preview mode, let's keep on going chronologically. Next up, we've got the East Division final. You mentioned it. The Boston, I mean, we've got to almost have a name for this, like the Boston Bombardment. You talk about it just flipping the script. I'm with you. I thought for how DC handled the end of their season and how they handled New York in the first round matchup, I kind of had them slated as the quiet favorite, other than Chicago, who also got upset. I kind of had DC as a quiet favorite to make a run at a title this year. You know, we've been setting up, this might be Rowan's final season. This team is coming on athletically, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They just seem to be, you know, peaking at the right time. And they just ran into a Babbitt-sized brick wall in Boston.
It was incredible because I think, you know, you and I, it wasn't that we didn't think Boston could win. Like, we knew there was a chance they could win. But we were leaning toward DC because of how they finished the season and how they eviscerated New York, and this glory team had kind of limped to the finish line with meaningless games, and would they be ready?
It bears mentioning that DC won 2 out of the 3 regular season meetings against Boston, including handing them their first loss of the season, too. You know, this was a good and favorable matchup, it seemed, for the Breeze.
Yeah, and we put a stock into the fact that DC's already shown they could win in Boston, because they did.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should think of the regular season series as more 1-1 than 2-1, because the last game was what it was. Boston had clinched the top seed the night before, second day of a back-to-back, bunch of guys sitting out, etc. Game meant a whole lot more to DC than it did to Boston. But this was over quickly. And I said to Toner on Saturday night, I can ask you the same thing. Like, do you ever remember a game between 2 premier teams? So, like, we're not talking Madison, Detroit, or Vegas, New York, or whatever, but like 2 top teams where for extended stretches, it just felt like the cutters on one team's O-line couldn't get open. Like, we don't really think of getting open as a major struggle in the UFA. It's about the choices you make and where you get open and execution, etc. Like, and occasionally a guy gets locked up. But this was not occasional. This was defenders relentlessly locking up Tyler Monroe and Cole Jurek, and, you know, even Christian Boxley to some extent. I mean, Boxley's speed was, you know, the best of anybody, but, you know, Rowan McDonald, Jeff Wodach, Aiden Downey, like guys that you don't typically think of as having trouble getting open. Like, you know, Jacques Nissen finished the game with 4th row as Jacques didn't have a great game, but this was just a situation where the disc was in his hands a lot and he had nowhere to go. And, you know, it's not like Boston's guys had a lot of blocks. They finished with 7 blocks, but that just doesn't speak to the number of coverage sacks. And I just can't remember ever seeing this type of defense before in a game between 2 good teams. So, like, I wonder, is that more about DC's cutters? And, you know, Tyler Monroe's never been like a really, you know, speed demon at this stage of his career, but he's still been able to get open. Same thing for Wodach and all the guys I mentioned. Like, what were you thinking watching it from afar, just with how Boston came out with such ferocity and intensity on the defensive side?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Boston, as we've talked about extensively throughout this season, they might be the best team in the league at matching up 1-versus-1 against the opposing team and just dominating matchups across the board. I mean, they've got the 2-time reigning MVP in Babbitt. They might have the fastest team when they're fully healthy and fully active. The team that they bring to championship weekend might be the fastest team in the bracket. And so, yeah, they can just eat up space. I mean, they're a physically imposing team. This is the thing that we knew from day one about the 2025 glory. And they just went out there and took that. And, some of it I think is also the stylistic matchup. Again, DC's reticence with stretching the field, I think really hurt them in that game. Boston could just settle and put everything in front of them and then attack it. I mean, so many of their blocks were even just kind of Brendan McCann stepping in front of a high stall reset throw and then them taking it in for a quick counterattack score and a break. This wasn't, flying. It wasn't Tony Mwanga and Noah Hansen flying through the air and getting hellacious layout blocks. It was just, we're going to line up our 7 guys across from you, and we have faith in every single one of our 7 defenders that they're going to win their matchup. And to your point, I can't remember that kind of defensive performance against an opponent like that. I think maybe like 2014 championship game when the Spiders just kind of took the wheels out from under Toronto, the defending champs at that time. Like that's kind of where my mind goes, and that's 11 years ago at this point. But, given the circumstances, given the quality of these teams, again, given the way DC looked coming into this game, it was just a flatlining. Like it was just, or a flattening, I should say. Like Boston just rolled them. And they were giddy about it. Like you could sense midway through that first quarter, they knew it. They knew that they had this DC team in the vice grip and that they were just going to twist it harder and harder over the next 4 quarters. 9 goals. They almost finished under 7. They had to get a couple at the end of that fourth quarter when the game was well out of hand. I just, phenomenal defensive performance. All-time defensive performance from the Glory.
And their offensive performance was not too shabby either. They were boring, but they were astonishingly efficient.
They are. They're the 6th most efficient league or offense in the league this year, so you gotta give them their props.
And look, Jeff Babbitt threw more completions in a game than any other game in his career, and did not have a turnover. And I think averaged 1.5 yards per completion. Like he wasn't throwing downfield. It's hard to be that patient,
Yeah.
It's not as fun to be that patient. So that's the demon on one shoulder versus the demon on the other, or the angel on the other. Like we could just hang on to the disc and take our time and wear them down. It felt historic because of how they performed defensively and how they performed offensively. Like the New York Empire, when they had 3 turnovers against DC in the East Final 2 years ago, that was not a patient performance. Ben Yot caught like 8 hucks that game. He just dominated in the deep space. And in this game, Boston had so many possessions where it was just like 2.5 minutes off the clock, and DC never had a chance for a block, and they would gradually work it down, caterpillaring their way down the field, and then they'd get to the red zone, and Babbitt would, take control on the front goal line, or Toba would, or Albert Yuan would, and I mean, Simon Carapella coming back, like, what a great glue guy.
So good. Yeah, and his evolution since his rookie year, for him to go from kind of a finisher, red zone target to what he is now is kind of a complementary continuation piece. Hats off to him as a personal development.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Sadok too. Like he's always been a bit of a shooter, and he just kind of chilled and worked it around. And
have you looked at the Orion Cable stat line, by the way, from this game?
Is he like bizarro. 9 for 9?
He was 19
for 20, yeah.
0 assists, 0 goals, -1, -60 throwing yards. And it's one of those stat lines that does not tell the story of how he was used. I was so impressed with how they staggered him on the far side of the field and just made DC's defense worry about him, which is a very legitimate worry to have with the big man Cable. But they kind of used him as a decoy. And to your point, away from Cable, they just caterpillared that disc up the field. They just worked it through all the other pieces. And hey, if DC's not going to focus for a second on Cable, fine, we'll go throw it over the top. But they didn't need that. You look at the top 4 throwers for Boston, and they had 1 throwaway combined. You even expand that to the top 6, it just goes to 3. I mean, no one on Boston's O-line had more than a single throwaway in this game. And just all the pieces work so well together. Another player who I just think complements and adds to their offense in a way where they've never really had that piece before, the rookie Ryan Dinger. He's kind of a bigger thrower. He generally starts in the backfield. He's really sneaky at getting open at the right times for this team, and is just such a valuable add, I think, to them. I don't know. I really liked what Boston did offensively, even if they bore me to tears at times.
Well, Ryan Cable led the glory in completed hucks this year. He was 16 for 28, which 16 for 28, 57%, not a very efficient percentage. And for him to transform from the guy who hucked it 2.5 times a game to a guy that was going to have negative 60 throwing yards in the biggest game of the year. I mean, I've been on sidelines where Jeff Babbitt has yelled at his team for making stupid choices. There's something about Babbitt's presence, and he's a guy that hates to turn the disc over, as we saw. And he's had single-digit turnovers in every season of his career, I think. I'm gonna fact check that really quick. The most turnovers Babbitt's ever had in a season was 6. 6 throwaways, and also had 2 drops in 2017. 1 throwaway this year. But I'm curious, Adam, after seeing this, can Boston maintain that level of patience? And B, will we see other teams think and act like we need to do what they're doing and we can't take our shots and we need to just, score in 3 minutes? I know, coaches around the league talk about offenses get tired in the UFA, especially during long possessions. The thing with Boston was Babbitt wasn't running a lot. He was just hanging out 10 yards behind the disc. And if it was stall 3 or 4, they would just turn around and float it up to him. And oftentimes there wasn't even a defender nearby, because if Babbitt's not in a threatening position, why not go double team the thrower? I'm really curious how Bryce Merrill and the Salt Lake defense are going to handle that.
Well, we'll get to line after line of young defenders just throwing themselves willy-nilly trying to blow up a play. I'm so interested in the stylistic clash between Salt Lake and Boston in that first semifinal. But you know what? We should save that for later, because this has all felt like a little bit of hors d'oeuvres, because now we get to talk about the 2 most thrilling games of the weekend, the Central Division Final and the West Division Final. That Central Division Final between Chicago and Minnesota, I think, for me personally, was one of the most just engaging matchups to watch over the last several seasons, given the storylines coming into the season, given the way that the Union brought themselves into 2025 as a specific challenger to the throne for their divisional rivals from Minnesota. The way in which the Union started by scoring a break and going up 2-0, and a real oh no moment for the wind chill, as they'd already dropped the first 2 games of the season against their most competitive rivals. And yet, as I was saying to you right before we started recording, this was the most quintessential win I've ever seen from Minnesota, and behind their championship victory last year, probably the greatest franchise victory that they've ever had. It was just front to back exhilaration. You got Justin Burnett flying around making Sports Center layout plays. You got the Noah Hansen block going down as one of the clutchest blocks in league history. Also, we've got to come up with a name for him, and I proposed this to Brandon Mattis, the longtime Minnesota player. Might be a little PG-13, but how about the Chicago Strangler for Hansen? This is the second time he's gotten a game-clinching block in that stadium against the Union. Just feels kind of nice, right? We need more nicknames. I want more nicknames. NBA's dying off with their nicknames. We got to get more nicknames in here. We don't even have a nickname for Babbitt, he's kind of like a soccer star. He just gets the last name treatment. But anyways, it was just there's so many different points to tackle too on the outside edge of this game. Chicago stalls out at 99 franchise victories. If they had won that game, they would have gotten to the Century Club, and instead Minnesota shuts the door on them in that way. All of the smack talk that the Union have been doing for 8 months now, 9 months. This began in the latter part of 2024, where Chicago was singing about how they were going to come and challenge the throne. I just, what were your thoughts about this game watching from afar?
Well, my initial thoughts were here we go again because
Yeah.
Minnesota got broken the first 2 points of the game. And it's like, all right, this is going to be 21-10. But when Minnesota hung around late in the first and seemingly got their feet under them, and you saw how wonky the wind was and just how inconsistent Chicago was in handling it, you thought, all right, maybe they can keep it close. I still never expected Minnesota to win this game, really until the Noah Hansen block. Even when it's 17-all and Chicago has the disc deep in their own end zone, I still kind of expected them to find a way. And for it to be yeah, Minnesota super proud about the way they played. They forced Chicago to really work. But, the Union were still the better team. And then, Nate Goff had the questionable shot at 18-17 that Desmarais didn't really have a chance on. I think it kind of soared over them. But, not a shot that they needed there. Burnett had Desmarais covered. And, again, if not for the Hansen play, we'd be talking all about Tristan Vandy Mortel's shot that looked like it was just a punt. And if it was going to be a punt, hopefully it would come back in bounds. And Dylan DeClercq, that catch, there was no defender nearby, but it's still one of the great pressure catches of all time. I can't really remember another play like that. That was one of the fun things about the weekend. There were so many, seemingly unprecedented things that we saw. And one other thing about Divisional Championship weekend, just kind of generally, Adam, I said I love this weekend. Part of it is just that you get these rivalry games with everything on the line and bragging rights on the line for the next 8 months or 9 months until they see each other again. And, the rivalries either being formed or multiplied or whatever. That's what, we see a bunch of great interdivisional games. Championship weekend is going to be awesome. But there's, even though there's some connections between Boston and Salt Lake, even though Atlanta and Minnesota have played once, that's nothing like Boston, D.C., or even Salt Lake, Oakland, they played twice this year. And, Atlanta, San Diego had never played before, but this was their third game of the season. So just that familiarity breeds contempt. There's something really true about that. And yeah, what a great weekend. Minnesota, I think it's really funny. Here's my question for you. How many more playoff games do they need to win for you to believe in them and pick them?
Right. I mean, at this point, 0. I think they've acquitted themselves. I think a title one year and then defeating your foe who came with a specific target on your back for you the next is about as much accreditation as you need in this league. And again,
but are you going to pick them against Atlanta? Are you going to pick them against the Hustle?
I might. They won against them earlier this year. I know it was at home, but this is going to be like a home away from home for them at Breeze Stevens. I mean, Minnesota has dominated in the stadium in recent years. So, yeah, I might pick the wind chill. I want to see some active rosters. Still want a couple more days to think through all my thoughts. But, yeah, I mean, they beat Chicago. I mean, that was the team that we had kind of pegged as starting to look like, hey, that could be the favorite. I know it's a season with a lot of parity at the top. But, to the point of this game being historic in the wrong ways for the Union, they now become the first team ever to go undefeated during the regular season and not make championship weekend. I mean, talk about a quick reversal of fortunes for the Chicago team, right? I mean, going into this weekend, they basically have the MVP frontrunner in Dumouriez. They have a 12-0 record. They have the home game. They're cruising on egotism, and it just gets swept under and absolutely dismantled by this Minnesota team. And again, I think it all comes back to this damn Minnesota defense. It is just so deep, so well coached, knows its matchups better than any unit in the league, and I would say by a margin. I mean, the attention to detail in this game, you got a great quote from Gordon Larson about the marks in this game. I encourage anyone that's into deeper aspects of the game, go back and look at the marks and the pressure that Minnesota just puts on the point of attack for Chicago. I mean, it is just, it was one of the most complete team wins I've seen. And we talk a little bit about Noah Hansen, Justin Burnett. I want to throw another name out there that I want to spend just a minute discussing. How about Paul Krennic in recent weeks? You know, in the first round matchup against Anthony Gutowski, the regular season league leader in goals, holds him to his first ever goalless game as a pro. Second round, he got the Goff matchup, and while Goff got some good plays, I thought PK acquitted himself real well. I mean, I think when he came into this league, we all kind of thought, given his college prowess, as Krennic being more of an offensive slotted player. But his ability to really hone his game on the defensive side of the disc, I mean, he is locked in right now. And I just think that, again, adding him into the mix alongside of Burnett and Hansen and Pollard and DeClercq, everyone who's playing up for this Minnesota D-line, it's the kind of ingredient that makes you think, hey, maybe we could see the first back-to-back champions not named New York, you know, or Oakland.
Or Oakland, San Jose. Yeah. PK just turned 23 in June, too. He's still really young, really, coming into his prime. He's been fantastic. Their defense has been legit. That's certainly not a question. And Chicago's offense is suspect. And
well, I mean, how many different lineups did they have this year? 8+ on the offensive side of the disc. I mean, I know that they, travel light to Detroit and Indy and everything, but I think that really came back to bite them in this game.
Yeah, I hear you, and I agree to some extent, and I also think they could have won this game if they had just converted a few more times, and then they'd be 13-0 on their way to championship weekend, fighting off Minnesota. Obviously, that didn't happen. It was weird to me all year long how Pavel Giannis, who's thrown more assists than anyone in the history of the league, just, was like leading their second D line. And part of it had to do with his availability preseason and his availability to attend practice and kind of get that O-line working together. But with big game moments and big situations, they put the disc in Pavel's hands. We saw that in double overtime against Atlanta. Pavel was in at that point, 17 all. Tough game, tough season for Paul Arders. He never really found the same rhythm that we've seen in the past. And, he might not be like the ideal UFA center handler. He might be better in kind of that Ryan Osgar role, initiating downfield, making things happen with his pinpoint throws off of a cut. Nate Goff had his ups and downs, literally. He could sky over anybody. He could sky into his teammates. I was glad that he and Van Dusen were both okay after that scary collision. And yeah, it was just it's
Dumouriez looked mortal. He looked almost like he had stamina in the second half of that game. How about Justin Burnett sort of flipping the script after Dumouriez dominated in their July 4th game? Burnett getting the better of this matchup, it felt like, forcing Dumouriez into 3 throwaways and just, again, not being a major contributor down the stretch.
I am really curious, what Chicago 2026 is going to look like.
Oh man,
I have absolutely no idea.
That's a full podcast episode later this.
It really is,
man.
It really is. Set the date and we'll dive into it because, man, and look, it goes back to the week before when many of these Chicago players, did not have great weekends playing club Frisbee. And there's just something to, like, for a long time, Ultimate players are like, yeah, we can flip the switch. We're thinking about process. Like, creating a culture of winning and being successful is really valuable. And trying to win every game you play. And look, they won every game they played during the regular season. So it's hard to really ding them for that. But yeah,
I tell you what you can ding them for, 15 of 22 in the red zone, 68%. Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow in a 2-goal loss at home against
Oakland's looking at that and thinking that's pretty good, by the way. And we'll get to that.
Well,
We'll get to that in a second.
Should we shift to the West Division final?
In 1 minute.
Okay.
It's just like I think what you said about this kind of being the quintessential Minnesota moment was really apropos. And in the wind and in the bad conditions, they have a resilience and a wherewithal that is really special. And that is this team's greatest strength. We saw it against DC and Carolina, this year against Chicago. It's really hard to stay in the moment and bring your best every point when things aren't going well. Like, to maintain that level of focus and intentionality and attention to detail, like when you start down, and there were a bunch of runs in this game where it would have been easy to kind of, like, I don't like the term, like, yeah, it would have been easy to fold, but we fought back. Like, obviously you're going to keep fighting, but there's a lot of different ways to keep fighting, and some are more productive than others. And Minnesota has found a way to productively fight back, and learning from their mistakes early in the season. I mean, it's just really similar to last year, where they got blasted by New York. They lost at home to Pittsburgh, and
they lost at home to Chicago by 5.
Yeah,
late in the season.
So one thing I want to dive a little bit more into with you next week, Adam, is the quality of the assistant coaches on all 4 teams at championship weekend. Like, and we have seen teams have assistant coaches for a long time. We've seen, single-minded kind of leaders. I think more and more as time's gone on, like, the more successful teams in the league have had this kind of, like, cadre of ultimate minds leading them and delegating different responsibilities and being really particular with who's doing what. And, from Boston with Nathan Wicks and Jake Smart and Sam Lehman to, Atlanta with Skyler and Abby and Mark Poole and, obviously Joe Merrill helping out Bryce Merrill and obviously what made me think of this was Max Longchamp and Carlos Lopez with Minnesota. And while Ben Feldman is a great leader at the head, he'll be the first to tell you that Max is kind of the engineer of so much of what they do and the micro adjustments that they make, and those things matter. And this Minnesota team, I'm scared to pick against them. I probably will, but I'm scared to pick against them. They're probably delighted if I pick against them. We'll talk about that more next week. Let's go to the West, unless you have something to add.
Well, let's just move on to the West, because I feel like there's so much still to talk about with that game. I mean, you talk about back and forth contests, and by the fourth quarter, truly not knowing who's going to win a game. That was Saturday night between Oakland and Salt Lake. Salt Lake jumps out to a 4-1 lead in the first quarter. Oakland then wins the second quarter 6-5. They win the third quarter 7-2 and took a 14-10 lead at one point on the road against the Shred. And then finally, a Tony Mwanga block-filled fourth quarter and a rally got the Shred over the top. They win the fourth quarter 7-3 to persevere 18-17 over the Spiders. But this was probably just pound for pound the most thrilling matchup of the entire weekend. I mean, the Shred Heads were absolutely rocking in the stands. You had a great quote
Delirious.
from Eugene LaRue about it being the loudest atmosphere that those teams have ever played in a Frisbee game. And yeah, it had, again, that rollicking fun that so many West Division games have that just feels a little bit of a different blend than what we see in the East, Central, and South.
No doubt. It's just different out west. Whether that is a prohibiting factor for them winning games at championship weekend, we could debate, and we'll certainly see with this Salt Lake team against a Boston squad that was absolutely clinical. Salt Lake was not clinical for stretches in this game, especially in the third quarter. Neither was Oakland. Both teams had their moments of great playmaking and wise choices. But yeah, this game was electric. The second half was wild because the Shred couldn't get out of their own way in the third quarter. And then just, I mean, in the third quarter, I'm sure I'm not alone. Like, I'm thinking about, all right, who's Oakland going to play at championship weekend? Because if Oakland had won this game, it would have been Minnesota against Boston and Oakland versus Atlanta. So that would have changed all the matchups around. And I'm like thinking about Minnesota, Boston. I don't know if I like that matchup for Minnesota as much. Oakland,
Right.
Atlanta, that's like a weird, but obviously that didn't happen. If this was PTI and we were doing toss up, the way to kind of analyze this game, toss up, Spiders Shred, bigger Shred comeback or Spiders choke? Where do you come down?
I think it's still a Shred comeback, again, given the defensive intensity from the home team in that game. But this Oakland team, I mean, especially against the Shred, they've got to be having a lot of questions hanging over their head about what happens in the fourth quarter, because this is now the second time this season where they've had an opportunity to just close the door on the Salt Lake team, and they can't. And it's so intriguing to me as to why it happens. I feel like I need to still watch the ends of these Spiders game more, because this Oakland team, for much of the season, as we've talked about, is a top 5 offense when they're playing their game. This is a terrifically talented roster, and yet they just can't seem to get it when it matters most against a Shred team that, for being fallible, continues to just ride out on youth, athleticism, moxie, and this wild home crowd that they've built out in Utah. I mean, you talk about like an 8th defender on the field. That's exactly what the Shred had on Saturday night. I mean, that Tony Mwanga block in the end zone, you got to give at least a partial credit to the crowd. I mean, Oakland's backed up in the absolute coffin corner of their own end zone. And it's a pressure cooker. You could see it from the Spiders. And you saw it, I think, in other games throughout the season. These fans, the stadiums, it adds a different element. I think we're so used to having the awesome atmosphere of, the sidelines of like a club tournament or something being packed with fans or whatever. It's different when it's a grandstand. It's different when it's one team specific home crowd. And I just think you saw that against Oakland. I mean, to your point, I think it might have been a little bit of an Oakland choke, because I think, as we've been talking about this season, the Spiders probably have top to bottom the most talented roster in the West, but there's that extra little something that's missing. And on the reverse side, Salt Lake has had that extra something in spades. I mean, they're riding a 12-game winning streak into championship weekend. They're the hottest team in the league, and their one loss is to Atlanta, the South Division champs.
Are you saying that Oakland's men are more talented than Salt Lake's boys? Are you saying that? I didn't say that.
There's a lot more ability to grow facial hair on Oakland. Let's put it that way. I mean, I know the Spiders have tons of youth talent, and shout out to Smoke, who I think just recently won the YCC championships for one of the brackets. Oakland and the Bay Area have some of the best young talent in the entire world. But yeah, these like you say, these kids on the Shred. I mean, it's really like a sort of Peter Pan thing, like the Rufio army. I mean, it's just next boy up. Whether it's the Pugh brothers, Mwanga,
In the past it was the Hoffmans. It just
Yeah.
feels like every single year
Selfridge, DeMorgan.
they just restock the stables, and then it's like, who are all of these young dudes who are indefatigable just flying around out here? I mean, they really do lay out unlike any other team in the league.
Yeah. And as you said, there's a youth pipeline that's continuing to come and come. It's not that the pipeline is bare right now. Couple thoughts. Number one, amidst all of the things that I've talked about where like we haven't seen this before, can you remember another block on the back end of the goal line like that Tony Moonga block? I mean, we don't see that type of layout on like the back line of the end zone. I can't remember another one like that. I'm sure there's been a couple, but you just don't usually see blocks in that part of the field, especially layout blocks like that. So that was one thought I had. Number two, it's a tough weekend for the crowd of naysayers that say there's no defense played in the UFA.
Yeah.
Because in pressure moments, like the nerves that you see from offenses and the ways that defenses can create pressure, by double teaming and mixing and matching and forcing sideline starts and just all the different things you can do in the UFA. And no team has a bigger bag defensively of different wrinkles than the Salt Lake Shred. And they practice them. They try all sorts of things just to see if they work, and they're going to throw everything at Boston in a couple weeks, or next week, I should say. It's going to be fascinating to see if they can, create some of that pressure against a Glory team that looked pretty impervious to it. But yeah, that was my other thought. Just like Oakland looked, I mean, like for Oakland to throw into as many blocks as they did in the fourth quarter, it says something about both teams. Like, yes, there's a lot of talk about Salt Lake's physicality. I think about the turnover from Magsig that ultimately gave the Shred the lead, where he was kind of like double teamed, pivoting, off balance, and then was like going to travel. So he just kind of threw the swing, and it was easily intercepted by the weak side poached defender. And like he's kind of looking for a foul, but I don't think there was contact on that replay. He just kind of expected there to be contact because oftentimes there is contact, and that's, Salt Lake plays an aggressive brand of marking, and they're not the only team. And yeah, like Oakland was spooked down the stretch, and it was just such a crazy juxtaposition after they had been so dominant really through the second and third quarters. Like the third quarter is where they made their defensive run. But after the first, they really settled in offensively, and they weren't broken at all in the second and third quarters, and they looked like they had figured it out. Now, we should mention no Leo Gordon for this game.
Massive loss.
He tested positive for COVID before the game, coming off the U.S. Open. So, yeah, he was bummed to miss it, and that was a big loss. Circumstances like that happen. It's a really tough break. I know that he was really disappointed that he couldn't play, and obviously they missed him. But it wasn't like the talent covered his bear, obviously. They still had a lot of really good players. And
it's a single goal loss, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier in this podcast. That red zone part of the field for this Spiders team was an absolute pitfall. I mean, we mentioned the struggles for Chicago. How about Oakland? 12 of 23, 52%. I just, that's staggering to me, especially for a team that's kind of built off of small ball motion like Oakland. I mean, they only attempted 5 hucks in this game. It wasn't like they were trying to stretch it over the top, and yet they're that inefficient, that close to the end zone. I mean, it's staggering, again, for me to look at as a number. That's not something you would expect from the system, from the talent on this team, and yet either the nerves or the physicality or just the amount of Shred players flying around, it really got to Oakland. You could visibly see it in the fourth quarter.
Season high red zone turns easily. 11 of their 22 turns came in the red zone. Season low 6 blocks, tying their season low of the game they lost to Colorado when Tobias Brooks shredded them up, no pun intended. And yeah, disappointing way to go for the Spiders. I mean, after the season they had, yes, they lost their 3 regular season games to Colorado and Oakland, but like there were
Or Salt Lake.
excuses. Yeah, I'm sorry, to Colorado and Salt Lake. You're right. But there were like explanations for all of those losses, and you felt like, all right, if they put it all together, they have the pieces to go to championship weekend and compete for a title, no doubt. And they showed that in the middle 2 quarters, and they had the game in their grasp, and Salt Lake slipped away. And yeah, more painful loss this weekend, Chicago or Oakland. Like that's a fun, superfluous debate because it really doesn't matter. They were both excruciating, but you could make a case it was the Spiders because they had a 3-goal lead and just did not bring their best in the fourth quarter with the season on the line. And as you said earlier, it was very reminiscent to the Salt Lake at Oakland game. In that game, Salt Lake was down 2 with under a minute to go and found a way to win in overtime. So there's something about the shred and the way they're trained. I mean, Bryce Merrill talked about it after the game. Like we trained mentality in winning this year. We didn't train skill, which isn't to say they didn't work on stuff, but like every single thing they did, whether it was a sprint or a little scrimmage or a drill, there was a winner and a loser, and they were tracking it all season long and have like this complex, RPI, rating percentage index for every player on the team of like who's the winning most player on the team during all their stuff that they've done. They probably keep it for Settlers of Catan on the bus on the way to the games too. Like that's how ferociously meticulous that they've been in terms of tracking this type of stuff. So yeah, Salt Lake, I mean, we were so close to a 12-game winning streak going down and then an 11-game winning streak going down in just a couple of hours. But the Shreds survive and live to see another day. And they are not going to survive a third quarter like they had against Oakland if they play a 12-minute stretch like that against Boston. So they need to be better if they're going to have a chance to make it back to the finals, in my opinion.
One last point about this West Division final, and we talked about it briefly before this recording. Adam Reese gets that Callahan in the final minute of the game, pulls the game back within 1. There's been discussion over the past couple off seasons about rewarding the disc back to the team that gets the Callahan. Can you imagine the pandemonium in that stadium had Oakland gotten that Callahan and then got set to receive with a chance to tie on the final drive of the game?
It was the first thing I said to Ian Toner. We were watching it in the hotel lobby late Saturday night. I'm like, what if the rule had changed? Because like the Philly and New York, that was one of the rule changes in the preseason when they had that exhibition game. It never came into play because there wasn't a Callahan. There almost was, but there wasn't. But yeah, I think it'd be a great rule change. It would penalize Callahan's more. It would reward the defense more, and like it would be the closest thing to like a 2-point play that we have in Frisbee if you could get a Callahan in a moment like that. So, and look, Oakland got the disc back anyway with a chance to win.
That's true. That's true. I forgot about that.
And, just a tough final throw that didn't make it to the end zone. I mean, that's a difficult situation to be in. But yeah, that was the first thought I had when we saw that Callahan. There was like one Callahan in every 4 or 5 games during the regular season. So I guess it makes sense that we've seen a couple Callahans in 8 playoff games so far. But yeah, for that to happen in that moment, Bryce was pulling his hair out, I'm sure, making it as exciting as they did. But Salt Lake finds a way. Their crowd deliriously celebrates. And, yeah, the Shred back to championship weekend. I mean, they were so close, Adam, to being in that Atlanta territory of losing by one back-to-back years at home in the West
No, I
Final.
didn't even think about that yet.
And that's
I,
that's like a tough scar. I mean, obviously the Hustle have overcome it, but that's not a fun feeling through the off season for sure.
it's one of those lessons you'd like to avoid learning, right? You know it's instructional, it's probably going to build you into something bigger, but maybe we could just skirt that little, instruction right there. But now, we have this Final Four field set up. I am absolutely geeked on these matchups. In the first semifinal, again, as we mentioned earlier, Boston versus Salt Lake. And then in the prime time Friday night, August 22nd matchup, Atlanta versus Minnesota. The winners of those games will advance to the 2025 UFA Championship game, which will be played on Saturday, August 23rd. That will be available live and free on YouTube. And while we're going to have a whole preview episode about these matchups and about championship weekend in general, and also I should mention the PUL versus WUL inaugural All-Star game on Saturday, August 23rd. We'll have previews about all that next week, But for right now, what are kind of your first thoughts heading into championship weekend?
Think any of the four teams could win it?
Yeah.
I think I look at Boston as the favorite because of the way they played against DC, and I expect them to be at full strength, or if not very close to it. And I think just their offensive patience, like in the end, Ultimate Frisbee is a game of keep away. And if you can play keep away better than the other team over the course of 4 quarters, you're going to win.
Yeah.
And it's also like, it's not like Boston has a weakness in end of quarter situations, because there are some really good end of quarter teams at championship weekend. I mean, Atlanta's really good at it with Dean Ramsey offensively and defensively, and Fairley and Langdon and, Halsmeyer. Minnesota's obviously really good at these end of quarter situations with Pollard and Burnett and Bergmeyer and DeClerc and Salt Lake's not bad either. They're not as big, so that's a factor. I mean, the Shred are just quite simply not as large of a team.
I think that's going to be a big tilt point in that game, is can Salt Lake manage the size of Boston?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I had one Salt Lake guy say to me, like, Boston might be too big to cover us. I'm like,
yeah.
Well, I understand the point. I also watched Germany thrash Japan in the World Games last night as the bigger team. Watched it this morning. But
Tanner Johnson-Go is going to cause some havoc in those Salt Lake reset lanes. I mean, that dude has been playing really elevated ultimate on the D-line for Boston all season long, and I'm really excited to see how they utilize him and his length and size against this very up-tempo, very mobile Salt Lake backfield.
Yeah. Calvin Stoughton's not a name that we mentioned. He's played mostly offense and been kind of overshadowed by, like, Cable, DeCrana, Sadok, Carapella, etc. But him switching over to defense, he was really, really good. And then, just their young defenders, Ben Horisberger, who's, someone said to me during the college season, he's the best college defender in the country. It was one of his teammates that said that to me, so there's some bias in there. But, that he's in the mix for sure, and he only played a couple games during the regular season. Peter Borth only played a couple games coming back.
He was so good.
What a guy
DC.
he is.
Yeah.
Gus Haflin's leadership and intensity and instincts. Like, I just love the way that this Boston team played. I did remember one thing that I should have mentioned earlier, and this is a conversation for an hour ago. When we got word pregame that Miles Grovic wasn't going to play, that for DC, that definitely impacted my thoughts about the game. I mean, I think in the Tuesday toss before the game, I picked DC by 2. I thought, like, maybe Grovic that could swing it. And in retrospect, like if Grovik plays and if Thomas Edmonds plays, I'm still not sure DC wins, but it's definitely a closer game. So just wanted to mention Miles' name. It's really unfortunate he was out with an injury and couldn't go. I know he was bummed about that. But yeah, I think Boston deserves to be considered the favorite. I have them as, probably a 2.5 goal favorite over Salt Lake. I just think, East versus West and what we saw from Boston with 7 turnovers in their divisional final. Salt Lake had 20. Salt Lake had lulls. Boston did not. I think, it could go to 3.5 in my mind, but, there's also the fact of, do I still trust Boston to be as steady? Because, they have been up and down at times. I still remember them blowing a 4-goal lead with 7 minutes to go against New York on their home field earlier this year, and that game going to overtime. So I think Boston's, 2.5 or 3.5, but I'll say 2.5. And I think I view Atlanta as like a 1.5 goal favorite against Minnesota, but, that game feels a little bit more like a toss-up to me. And I think both games have the potential to be really great because each
Oh
team has
yeah.
different things they do well. Each team has an army of coaches that are really smart and going to spend a lot of time preparing. And it's going to be an awesome atmosphere at Breeze Stevens Field. What do you think of kind of the lines and what are your initial thoughts in the two matchups?
Well, I was talking to you about this earlier. I think, Evan, that as much as I respect Boston and do consider them the most talented team in the Final Four, I wonder if they might be the least developed in terms of its internal structure. I mean, you look at the other franchises here, Salt Lake, Atlanta, Minnesota. These are organizations that have been building to this moment for years, if not over a decade, in the case of Minnesota and Atlanta, too. They came into existence in 2015. And so I just think that Boston, for as good as they are, for as much as I agree with you, their style being favorable in these final 2 potential games for them, I wonder if some of that other stuff, the intangible stuff, comes into play in a neutral site environment like Breeze Stevens. And for as much as I want to support that argument, on the other side, I understand there's just a Babbitt factor with Boston where it's like,
Yes, there is.
yeah, there might be a little bit more of a sprint here going on for the Glory, but man, they've got some momentum behind it. Man, do they have a lot of players that can step up and play in these moments. So I'm really interested to see if that talent appears in the bracket against Salt Lake and potentially against Atlanta or Minnesota. Whereas with these other 3 teams, we talk about what makes a good team in this league. And I think these are truly 3 examples of exactly what every other team in this league wants to build towards, right? You've got youth players coming in every year that can kind of restock on the back end, that are exciting, that give you new elements, but you've got these fantastic cores that have been there since the beginning that really ground the franchises. There's such a great blend of veteran talent versus incoming talent. You talk about Matt Rader on Minnesota. I forgot to share this earlier in the episode. Apparently, throughout the entire game, Matt Rader was just going up and down the sideline, just kind of giving an okay sign to all of his Windshield teammates, and meaning that we're in this. We got this. Don't let the individual plays get to you. We are who we are. We've got the rings, right? They've got to come for us. And to have that on your sideline, I just think is indispensable. And I think I've talked before on this podcast. I experienced that personally last year when Minnesota came to Breeze Stevens Field to face the Radicals, and Rader was late for a game. He had traveled up by car from, I think, Kansas City due to flight delays. He shows up on the sideline after the weather delay, and everybody turned to that big line of a man and was like, great to have you, Rader. Great seeing you, Matt. I mean, to have that kind of a guy on the sideline is just indispensable. And that's just Minnesota. Atlanta's got a couple of their own. Salt Lake, while a little bit younger, they still have those kinds of galvanizing forces on their roster. And so I'm just interested to see kind of, again, these stylistic clashes. Boston's mega talent versus these well-rounded organizations that really build from the bottom up. I just think this has to be one of the best championship weekends in terms of, like you say,
really not knowing where the champion is going to come from.
Yeah, I have reason to believe as well, Adam, that this could be it for Matt Rader in the UFA. So that leadership you speak of, indispensable for sure. Some of his decisions on the field have been a little dicey
Yeah,
in both
he's
of
got that.
Minnesota's playoff games, but that's kind of who he's been for a long time. And there's a seesaw balance of risk that you accept for having his size and experience and leadership. What one
He
quick
also
final?
he also had that semifinal game against the Radicals in 2016. We talk about that being such an epic game with the Donnie Block finish and everything. The person who single-handedly kept Seattle within any sort of striking distance as Madison built his eventual 7-goal lead was Matt Rader, absolutely torturing Radicals defenders downfield. So, big game player, that guy.
Yeah, if they're diehard Ultimate fans that love our podcast, first of all, thank you. Second
Yeah,
of all,
thank
let's
you.
say you're newer to the sport or didn't watch the UFA back in 2016. Do yourself a favor, tune up for championship weekend by going to watch that Seattle Madison game. It's still easily on the short list for greatest games of all time. And has a lot of relevance with, players that are still around today, like Matt Rader. I got to wrap it up quickly, and I'm opening a can of worms with this question. So really, really quickly, how did the results in the division finals impact your thinking when it comes to possible 2025 UFA MVP consideration? Because it definitely shifted things in my mind, and I still feel very undecided heading into championship weekend. I think it's very up in the air, but I'm curious to get your quick thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, my pick changes pretty much with every round at this point. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I felt like Demarais was the front runner heading into the divisional championship weekend, and obviously with Chicago bouncing and just the way in which that game fleshed out, it feels like that might have been the slipping from him as the top spot in the MVP, but it elevated, the weekend elevated other players. I think, a name like Justin Burnett as a possible first ever defensive MVP in this league. You talk about the impact that he's had in big moments for that team. I think his name deserves to be thrown into the ring. You talk about Babbitt just sort of constantly adapting his game to whatever the competitive advantage is. I think, him being a little bit behind the pack for much of this year, he starts to now trickle up towards the front in a possible first ever 3 straight MVP run. Yeah, you really opened a can of worms here because, we've been saying all year, parity has been at an all-time high at the top of this league, and I think right along with that, the MVP race. It's just kind of like, well, which team is truly relying on a player? And it's just still so hard to discern at this point, even with just 3 games left.
Yeah, I think Demarais could still win it.
He could,
but I think I don't know if I have Burnett at that level. But
That's
maybe
fair.
championship weekend changes my mind on that. In my mind, it's one of these 5 guys. I mean, Demarais, Jeff Babbitt absolutely has played himself back into the conversation. It's such a quirky season he's had because of the injuries, switching lines, but he's just been so fantastic at what he's done. I still think Austin Taylor has to be in the mix for Atlanta.
Absolutely.
If he has a really good weekend. I don't think Brett Holzmeier's had his best season, but I still think he has the potential to be the most dominant player on the field. So if he goes off at championship weekend, that could be an interesting conversation too. Toba DeCrana also has to be mentioned.
Yep.
Like he gets a little overshadowed in Boston when Babbitt's back on the O-line. So, and then, like a guy like Chad Jorgensen, if Salt Lake ends up winning and Jorgensen has an incredible weekend, I think his season has put him in the conversation. So I think I just gave 6 names, 2 from Boston, 2 from Atlanta, Demarais, and it'd be really interesting. Like, I don't think we can give it to Alan Laviolette, but like, you just wonder if the Flyers had snuck into the playoffs, what he might have done. But yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's Austin Taylor, Jeff Babbitt, Toba DeCrana, or Don Desmarais with Chad Jorgensen on the outside of the conversation. But, I love that we don't have to make the decision now. I love that we include the biggest games of the year and the biggest individual award. And obviously, the individual award is secondary to winning the title. Desmarais said something that was great in an interview he did with Atkins and Mikey Lunn on Pod Practice that I listened to, where they asked him if it was important for him to win the MVP. And he said something to the effect of, it's not important for me to win it, but it's important for me to be in the conversation for it. Like, he wants to be among the best players. And while I think he'd be delighted to win it, he didn't make it, like, I think team glory was more important. And I just thought that was, like he said, every year I want to be in the conversation, even if I don't win it. So, I mean, he definitely has earned that. He is for sure in the conversation. But, losing that divisional playoff game, there is an element of team success that goes into these individual awards without a doubt. And, if you strongly disagree and want to try to come up to me at championship weekend and lobby me one way or another, I'm certainly open to it, because I am an undecided voter right now. And I don't know how someone could be, a decided voter with how close it really seems to be, and the important data points that are still coming up in the next week with the final 3 games that we've got.
Yeah, well, we've got 9 days between now and the end of the 2025 regular season. 3 games remain. Semifinals start on Friday, August 22nd, again with first Boston versus Salt Lake, and then Atlanta versus Minnesota. Those games will be available live on Watch UFA TV. And then on Saturday, August 23rd, we've got, again, the PUL and WUL All-Star Game that begins at 5 p.m. Eastern. And then the absolute pinnacle of the entire 2025 campaign, UFA Championship Game, Saturday, August 23rd, live on YouTube. And if you can, come here to the capital city of Ultimate in Madison, Wisconsin. It's going to be an absolute blast with UFA's biggest weekend of the season. Evan and I will, of course, be live there. We look forward to meeting some of you if you're in person attending Championship Weekend. But otherwise, we will see you next week with a preview episode going over all of these games, as well as probably a little bit of the All-Star Game as well. But that'll wrap it up for this episode of Swing Pass. We bid you adieu for now. But remember, Frisbee forever. Bye, guys.